We all know that vampires are killed by a stake to the heart, they hate garlic, and they are suave noblemen who wear capes. We know that Frankenstein's monster was a lumbering, green-skinned mouth breather who could barely get out a grunt, let alone a coherent sentence. All that zombies are animated corpses craving brains, that werewolves beget other werewolves with a bite, and that witches are really sexy around Halloween time. But are these truisms really true? Let's uncover some modern monster myths.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Weird World Podcast. I'm Carrie.
I'm Dean.
Hey, Dean.
Hi there, Carrie.
What are you doing here?
I'm going to do a podcast with you.
Oh.
This will be a two-part podcast. Today is part one. We'll bring you part two next. Obviously, that's how numbers work. Today, we're going to bring you a podcast that is all about monsters and modern monster myths.
Okay.
So you're probably thinking, wait a second, monster myths? Well, what if monsters are myths? Yeah, monsters are mostly myths, but...
Mostly?
Mostly. There might be some real monsters out there. I don't know. Some people believe in vampires. We'll see. You don't have to believe that monsters are real, though, to understand that the legends and the folktales upon which they were based do kind of establish some truths about them, right? But like most people, these things, monsters change. Monsters change
Right.
over time, like most
Yes.
things. Monsters, some more so than others. So I'm going to bring you 6 types of monsters, broadly defined. I count right.
He had to double check his math
I had
there.
to double check my math. Vampires, werewolves, Frankenstein's monster, ghosts, zombies, and witches. And again, what I'm just kind of lay out. Here's what these creatures, these monsters, were really like. That I know it's a little bit of an affectation, but the truth about these monsters. And now here's what it's mostly like modern movies and even modern literature has changed, or if you want to think about it this way, got wrong.
So you mean
about
them
these
now
monsters.
versus how they were when they were started?
But really, it's really kind of like how has modern media changed these creatures? And it really is, and usually just for their own dramatic benefit or something like that.
Right.
So in other
Yeah.
words, it's kind of ignored the quote unquote truth. It's almost like I think of it almost like, oh, they're getting the history wrong of it in a
Right.
sense, or they're changing the history from what it really was. And now I do understand that,
They
monsters,
didn't
most
really
of these monsters
exist.
aren't real.
Yeah.
And still, and so we'll see. So let's start with maybe, I don't know, what would you say? Are vampires kind of the dominant monster right now in the first quarter of the 21st century?
Yeah, they've been dominating for a little while now,
They have, haven't
I
they?
think.
Monsters. So vampires have become just huge business. The notion, though, of vampirism has been around for literally thousands of years. It goes way back.
And we've covered it on this podcast.
We have a little bit. And I'm not going to cover kind of the full history of this. I'm really going to cover on like their characteristics, their traits, their formation, things like that, and how those things have changed over time. How modern media has kind of altered those things for its own benefit. Vampires have been around, or vampiric creatures, I should say, have been around in like Mesopotamia, but really for at least the modern Western world, it kind of centers on sort of the Middle Ages in Europe, specifically, I guess Central Europe, Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe. That's where places like that are now like Romania and places
Right,
like that,
yeah.
where vampirism really became big and lasted to a shockingly late time. That people were doing things to bodies to prevent them from coming back as vampires into relatively modern times.
Yeah.
The word vampire, though, first comes around into the English language in 1732, and it's spelled with a Y, by the way, instead of an I. But it was in the newspapers reporting on, quote, epidemics in Eastern Europe of vampires in 1732. They were real, there's actually one of those cases I want to go into, an early 1720s case of the Austro-Hungarian Empire sent officials to investigate it, kind of a thing. A true case where that area of the country believed that they were being stalked by a vampire in the 1720s.
Yeah.
So now let's talk. So what are some of the things we think about when we know what vampires are? One of the things is the method of becoming a vampire is now what? It's almost like a contagion, isn't it? You get bit by the vampire and he sucks your blood, or
Yep.
maybe he makes you drink his blood, or maybe you drink, or he drinks your blood, something like that. There's some kind of blood swappage going on, which almost makes it seem a little bit disease-like, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe. That's kind of what we think of now. You're made into a vampire in the modern time because a vampire bites you, or you know.
Yeah, it's like if you survive a vampire attack, you become a vampire.
Yes, exactly.
It's werewolves too, right?
Pretty much, yeah, and zombies too, for that matter. Those
Yeah.
zombies. So it's become kind of it's dramatic, and it's violent, and we all love that
Yeah.
now. But in the folklore, again, like in real vampires, there's so many different ways for them to become vampires, and Slavic and even some Chinese traditions. Any corpse that was jumped over by an animal, particularly like a dog or a cat, could become a vampire.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, that's.
There'd be a lot of vampires running around then, I would think.
I would think. Bodies that had wounds that had not been treated by boiling water were at risk, which makes you wonder if they had
Ow.
some innate sense of
Germ
bacteria,
theory, yeah.
Germ theory, yeah.
Yeah.
In the Russian stories, vampires were sometimes said to once have been witches, and we're talking a little bit more about that when we talk about witches toward the end. And it's, it's more built into being against the religion, Russian Orthodox Church. They made them, vampires were seen as kind of religious enemies in some of the, and so that kind of anti-religiosity, or at least anti-Russian Orthodox Church, can cause you, or somehow was tied up with you becoming a vampire. Nothing to do, as you can tell, with being bitten by another
Right.
vampire. Sometimes the hybrid child of a creature or some kind of a demon or something like that, and a human could become a vampire.
Sure.
Or even sometimes other ones. So there's all kinds of different ways to become a vampire in the ancient lore. It wasn't codified the way it is now until relatively late. We're going to talk about this in a minute, but Bram Stoker basically almost reinvented the vampires for the modern audience. Not completely, but to a large extent. So how about in terms of how do you prevent becoming a vampire nowadays?
Wear a necklace of garlic.
Yeah, there's all kinds of ways to ward them off, but it's not. But do you ever think of ritual or magic or something like that in the modern sense? Do you ever see that?
I don't think
Doesn't
so.
seem like it. Not a lot of that. There is some
Yeah.
kind of physical thing. Line up big garlic bulbs or something like that. But
And just don't ever invite them in your house.
don't invite them in the house.
Because
Yes.
they can't come in unless you invite them.
That's for sure. That's certainly the modern telling has that. But there are lots of other ways. The Eastern Europe especially did things to the corpse to prevent them from coming back as a vampire.
Yeah.
That was the leading thing. You could bury the corpse upside down, was a major thing. Honestly, so
That seems pretty easy.
I can't get up now. I'm upside down. I can't dig my way out of the dirt. You would place earthly objects in with them, like scythes or sickles, or you'd place it near the grave.
Why? That would be giving them a weapon.
Kind of, yeah.
That's weird.
Yeah, that's not a smart thing to
No.
do. In hindsight, probably not a good idea. Sometimes they would sever the tendons, like at the knees, or maybe
Yeah.
the Achilles tendon, to prevent them from being, I guess, agile and
That's
walk
good.
around. That's not a bad call.
But don't they know vampires can heal themselves?
Well, that depends, because no, they couldn't
Oh,
back in the
okay.
olden days. So when they would sever their tendons, like, okay, there we go. It might try to get up and chase us and bite us, but it's not going to be able to. Here's one I didn't know about, and this is very common and widespread. You would strew something like millet grain or poppy seeds or sand on the ground outside the coffin, outside the grave of a presumed vampire, somebody you thought might be a vampire. And what would happen is that when the vampire would come out of its grave, it would see that and be forced to count each individual millet grain or piece of sand and give you, disenable it from roaming the night. Or if you were fleeing from a vampire, you throw a handful of grain at it or something like that, and they'd stop and have to count that, giving you a chance to escape.
Okay. Is this the origin story of A, Count Chocula, and B, Rain Man?
Not Count Chocula, Carrie. The Count in Sesame Street, right?
Yeah.
He's the Count. That's what it does. Yes. Ironically, Sesame Street is probably the most historically accurate depiction of a vampire, is what I'm saying. Isn't that weird? I had never heard of that before. So vampires were associated with this in a lot of cultures too, a lot of and widespread.
So vampires have OCD.
Even in China, if a vampire came across a sack of rice, they'd have to count in a grave. So it wasn't just European. It was also Chinese. And apparently there's some on the Indian subcontinent as well. Some Indian societies believe that would thwart.
That's bizarre.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
It became widespread with this obsession with counting.
Do you think that's why Sesame Street
I know. It's because
the
the word count.
Count Dracula.
For sure.
Yeah.
There's not, they weren't like secret horror aficionados, I don't think. But
I
no.
mean, he actually counted, so.
Yeah. How do you identify a vampire these days?
I mean, fangs,
Fangs.
widow's
yeah.
peak,
How about a mirror?
capes. They turn into bats.
They turn into bats, sure. A little more subtle. Let's say they
yeah.
didn't turn into a bat in front of you. And I don't know if the widow's peak is a fair one. But a lot of times you not see them in mirror.
They're
right?
beautiful.
Sometimes they're very, very sexy
They
vampires.
sparkle
Absolutely.
in the sunlight.
Damn right. Damn right. Old in the original sense of vampire, let's call it the truth
Yeah.
about vampires. You can do lots of weird things. Like one was you'd lead a virgin boy through a graveyard or the church grounds on a virgin stallion, and the horse would balk at the grave that held a vampire. So first of all, you gotta have a virgin boy.
Yeah.
And if he's like in his teens, he's going, what? No, what are you talking about? And then you have to be a virgin horse. I don't know how you did that. And then you've got to,
Yeah.
okay, show us the vampire, guys. Sometimes if you saw holes in the ground above a grave, that was said to be the sign that there's a vampire under there. So there was lots
Sure.
of weird little, strange tales of how you would identify a vampire, at least a vampire's grave. And of course, to ward off a vampire, it was just things like, we think of things like garlics and Bibles and crucifixes and rosaries and things like that. There are all kinds of, and mirrors too. And these things are. So there is folklore for that in
Yeah.
the old tales of vampires. All of those things have been used to, as a repellent. Like garlic has been a repellent for quite a long time, but it wasn't the bulbs. It was the white flowers of garlic that were typically associated with warding off vampires.
Okay.
And, yeah, I know. And garlic has long been seen as sort of a good thing, a good
Yeah.
plant kind of a thing. I don't know if again, early ideas. This is pretty healthy. Isn't garlic pretty healthy?
Yeah. I was going to say garlic is a good plant. Yeah.
It was Bram Stoker who brought the garlic bulbs and said these are the things that will ward off the vampire, not the flowers of it. The crucifix, of course, is the common one, or maybe the Bible. But Van Helsing, in the book Dracula, uses a communion wafer at one point to ward it off. Like, here's a cracker. Oh, God damn it, that's a Ritz. I mean, here's the communion wafer, and it could ward it off Dracula at one point. So anything seen as holy has been thought of. I don't know. I don't know this for a fact because I didn't see it anywhere. My guess is that's at least quasi-modern. I don't know. I mean, maybe not. Maybe I'm not clear by the reading that I did that it was something that really goes back to the
What do you mean by
13, 14,
modern?
1500s.
What's your definition of
Like
modern?
18th century, 19th century. That's a little bit more modern. Certainly by the 19th century. Like Bram Stoker's Dracula was 1897 when it was published, and that certainly changed a lot of the folklore.
Yeah. I would think that religion would have made stuff up
Probably. That's true.
before that.
But there are other things too that were not like garlic was non-religious. There was things like mountain ash, the wood, and roses could also be used to repel vampires. At least in Bram Stoker's version, I don't think that was true in historical. So that's another monster myth, if you will. And the whole it's not clear if you have to be asked in is true or not, or goes back to the original folk tales or not.
Yeah, I didn't. All of my life knowing about vampires, that whole they have to be invited in is fairly new in my knowledge of vampires.
I think that's new.
Yeah.
I think that's relatively whether or not Bram Stoker invented that, I don't know. But there were other ancient ways that are weird that we've lost completely in the modern vampire tellings. Things like in some ways in the old Russian and Polish, for instance, they would have the things to do with like the vampire's grave. Like they'd take blood from the corpse and they'd bake it into bread, and that could protect you, which seems like almost like the opposite because they eat the bread with blood in. That's kind of the opposite of what we think of as the modern vampire, where the blood can make you a vampire.
Maybe if it's cooked,
Maybe?
it takes on protective properties versus fresh blood.
Or,
Weird.
Could be, yeah. Or the dirt from the grave could have the same effect. You'd bake it into bread and eat it, and that could protect you from becoming a vampire, at least maybe by that corpse that you thought was a vampire. Now, how about killing vampires, right? What is it these days?
Stake through the heart.
Yeah. That's been true.
Chop off their head.
Chop off the head, decapitation. That some kind of a stab to the heart. But it didn't have to be a stake. It could be a knife or something like that. Or in other cultures, in Slavic cultures particularly, it would have to be a specific kind of wood. Like, again, ash was very popular in Russia and the Baltics, and hawthorn was said to be the wood of choice in places like Serbia and more southeastern Europe.
Huh.
And most often it was through the heart. But in some places, in Russia, for instance, you could actually stab them in the mouth, and it would work. And in Serbia, you could stab them in the stomach, and it would work. So it wasn't always centered on the heart.
So any place you could stab a human and they would die.
Kind of. The stomach is the worst one because it's the most agonizing and takes the longest amount of time. Although stuff it in the mouth, I don't know, that's weird. And other ways, you could pour boiling water over the grave, or just burn the body completely up, burn it entirely. That would work. And of course, as you said, the vampire could be killed by decapitation. A vampire also sometimes could be shot or drowned, which doesn't make a ton of sense.
No.
Because, well, neither does stake to the heart, if you think about it, because that heart shouldn't be beating. It's not alive. But drowned? I don't know. So, otherwise, nowadays, I think we think of vampires as, like you said, healing skills. If it's not a stake to the heart or decapitation, it could heal.
Yeah.
Or, of course, there's the other one. What's the other way to kill a vampire? The most dramatic way in the modern telling.
You kill all their descendants or something like that.
No, Carrie, no. Sunlight.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Rays of the sun. There is absolutely no support for that. Vampires can walk around at day with no problem in most folklore. There was no sense that the sunlight... Certainly, they're kind of creatures of the night.
Yeah.
They might get out of the grave at the dark as no one was in a graveyard at night. You didn't go to graveyards at night, but the sunlight is a relatively recent addition to how you would, destroy a vampire. Decapitation was probably pretty common as well, and it still is, but the stake to the heart is... And you do see some movies where they're lopping off heads. That's more... I feel like they save that more for zombies, and for vampires, there's usually a stake to the heart, isn't it?
Sure.
And a stake has become more important than a knife. But again, in ancient times, there was no... Most felt you could do it either way.
Yeah.
And garlic comes back too. In Romania, you could put garlic in the mouth. If you get garlic in the mouth of a vampire, as recently as the 19th century, they'd bury corpses with garlic in the mouth. So, one other thing that's got lost too that was common: shoot a bullet through the coffin. Just shoot the coffin.
Well, that's also relatively easy. Also,
pretty easy. Why we should still probably do that today?
Yeah.
Just to be safe. I'm not saying I believe in vampires. I'm just saying, just to be safe. The last thing you can do as you start to lower the casket into the hole, fire off a couple of rounds from an automatic, maybe even a shotgun, maybe even an AK-47. Fire off a few rounds into that coffin. No one's gonna know. It's not a big deal. If the coffin's metal, though, that could involve some
that could be a problem.
Yeah. Honestly, Carrie, it's worth the risk.
Okay.
How about traits? I mean, we think of what? Vampires now as immortal. Vampires now as thirsting for blood, right? Again, invisible to mirrors. They're always young and beautiful. They're repelled by daylight and things like that. And, of course, Stephanie Myers made them sparkly. Mm-hmm. A writer named Darren Shan, his real name is Darren O'Shaughnessy, he introduced the idea of a vampanese. It's like a purple-skinned vampire with red hair that was kind of a close cousin to the vampire. I've never heard of that. I'm interested, though. I don't know those stories. But Bram Stoker really changed a lot of things. He's the one who really codified the whole long fang thing. That wasn't visible fangs. Your teeth changing was not the norm at all.
Yeah.
Before Bram Stoker, they look the same pretty much. So Bram Stoker brought us those long, really dangerous fangs. Bram Stoker apparently invented the idea that they could not be seen in mirrors. Mm-hmm. That was Bram Stoker. And he may have been, they think he's probably funking on that idea in folklore that has been kind of lost for the most part, is that because vampires had no souls, they were dead, they couldn't cast shadows. Uh-huh. Have you seen that in modern vampire movies?
Maybe.
Yeah.
But also you can't take a picture of them. They won't show up on film.
Well, that has to be modern. But they think Bram Stoker used the idea that they couldn't cast a shadow to mean that they also couldn't be seen on a mirror.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
I don't think he did anything about not being able to take a picture of them. I don't think that's in the novel. I've read that novel, but it's been a while. And but it's probably the same idea with photographs and in some stories too. You cannot paint the likeness accurately of a vampire. It becomes distorted no matter how hard you try to paint it accurately.
That's weird.
So the whole idea is that you can't capture the image of vampires is actually pretty modern.
Yeah.
And vampires, guess what? They did not always drink blood. That was not the norm. Some, more likely, they drained their victims of almost like their life essence. They would cause fatigue, and that was considered like someone, almost like an energy vampire was considered evidence that there might be a vampire in the midst. So ironically, what we do in the shadows, with their depiction of an energy vampire, is fairly accurate with the folklore.
Yeah.
They have, I don't even know the show, but they have regular vampires with fangs and drinking blood. And then they have one guy who is just purely an energy vampire, but all the other vampires accept him as a vampire. They don't attack him. They don't drain his blood. He goes to the vampire conventions because he is a type of vampire.
I think the energy vampire thing has become a thing also in real life. People really believe that some people are energy vampires.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some people are, honestly. They just you.
No, they're not. Yeah,
they're not literally energy vampires, but there are people who are just exhausting.
Well, sure.
And I think they're people who are just really boring and drone and just, those kinds of folks are kind of energy vampires. But no one's stealing your energy like the Celestine prophecies and that kind of nonsense. In the olden days, too, vampires were kind of disease vectors, like widespread disease. Or widespread crops dying, things like that, were sometimes seen as, okay, there must be a vampire in our midst.
God blame someone.
That seems to have been lost, doesn't it? You don't see that with vampires depicted in modern times, do you? Bram Stoker also was the kind of the popularizer of how a vampire was made, of being bitten or consuming the blood of a vampire. That was Bram Stoker made that kind of the norm. He settled on that for vampire lore up until today, of being how you beget another vampire. Before that, there was lots of different ways, as we've kind of touched on before, of becoming a vampire. And one of the more common ones I didn't mention a minute ago was suicide. People committed suicide were in danger of becoming a vampire. Oh. People born with a full set of teeth were thought that they could be a vampire.
Is that a thing?
I did not know that's a thing. It makes my skin crawl to think about it.
Could you imagine?
A baby coming out of the chute with all its teeth. Even if they're baby teeth, terrifying and painful.
Yeah.
That would be a bottle-fed baby.
Because babies don't start getting their teeth until like 5 or 6 months.
Yeah, so that's wrong.
So...
were they 14 months in the chute?
Yeah, that's not really possible. But it could be like a version of like precocious puberty.
Yeah.
Precocious,
I guess.
Teeth.
Yeah. Other ways you became a vampire was just through sorcery or something like that. And again, being buried face up instead of face down or something like that. I don't know. There's all kinds of... Often these things are sometimes contradictory. But Dracula, something that's kind of got lost in the modern tellings, most of the modern tellings of Dracula, is that he was a big fan of wolves. He hung out with wolves. He communed with wolves and could kind of control wolves, actual wolves. Remember, wolves, we'll get to werewolves in a bit. Wolves were the scariest creature in the European world. You think it'd be bears. They have brown bears in Europe. They still do have brown bears in Europe. Bears are much bigger, but bears tend to be, the European bear tends to be not very dangerous to humans. It's weird because the North America, the grizzly bear is by far the most dangerous animal out there, and the polar bear to humans, whereas European wolves were incredibly dangerous and killed humans all the time and even attacked towns and villages and things like that. In North America, wolves are almost never attack humans. In Europe, they did, and people were scared of wolves more than any other creature out there in the forest. And so Bram Stoker had his Count Dracula be able. There's a scene where they're going on their way to the castle, and there's a scene where wolves are attacking their stagecoach or something like that. And of course, they can also commune with bats and become a bat, and those are not folklore. Those are not true. Those are myths. The wolf thing has kind of been lost. The bat thing, though, was kept. They were associated with bats because bats were kind of creatures of the night. Obviously, they're creatures really of the dusk. And so vampires were sometimes associated with the bats. The wolf went away. The bat came back, I think, because it's easier to, have a fake bat on a string, early movies and silent films,
Yes.
things like that, right? And also, here's just a theory of mine. I have no idea this is true, but movies had a wolfman early on that was separate. So you don't want to mix the two together. I think they wanted to keep those two things very separate, vampires and dangerous wolf creatures, because they had a wolfman that came out almost about the same time as the original, the first speaking Dracula movie.
Yeah, unless you're making Mad Monster Party, then you need all the monsters.
That's true.
To be there together.
True. Yep. And Van Helsing, by the way, they had werewolves were shown to be more powerful than vampires, and I think in the underworld, I think werewolves are also one-on-one more powerful than vampires as well. So I think movies have really separated the two things. They were a little bit more merged in older tales and in Dracula for sure.
Yeah.
There is I think the first time you see a vampire be fearful of daylight is a Nosferatu, the silent version made in 1922. That's as far from what I can tell. But you had some other 18th century tellings where the vampires actually could be healed by moonlight. So almost the reverse of that. But again, those things appear to be modern addings.
Yeah.
Additions. Hold on one second. The first time that a vampire was shown to be having to be invited into your house was not until the 17th century by a Greek theologian who I guess posited that. But I think in all seriousness, like, just don't invite a vampire, which is a real thing, as we all know, into your house and you'll be okay. They also couldn't cross running water. But of course, Bram Stoker threw that away. He's buried in his own coffin to touch the ground of Romania, but he is taken by a ship all the way to England. And in fact, somebody gets out there and kills the entire crew. And Count Dracula, though, is not affected by sunlight. He doesn't burn. He doesn't like it. He'd rather be. Maybe his powers are reduced. So more modern versions have made vampires be instantly killed by sunlight. That's not even a Bram Stoker thing. That's even later than that. So my guess is because it is very dramatic. You could do stop action early on. You could do that in early films and show that pretty dramatically, very easily.
And if you don't want to be super violent, you could just trick them.
Yeah, that's true.
Trick a vampire into...
Yeah, that's actually a good consideration because they often, especially after the Hays Committee in 1923 or so, you did see a lot less violence on film for quite a long time. Actually, we're going to talk about that when we talk about Frankenstein in a while. And then, of course, the other thing that has become more of a modern sort of truism is that Bram Stoker based Count Dracula on the infamous Vlad Dracula, whatever, the Vlad the Impaler, the ruler of Wallachia, now part of Romania. One of the foremost experts on Dracula, Elizabeth Miller, she says that's not true. Bram Stoker didn't have anything to do that. He based on a lot of legend. He made up other stuff, but he didn't pattern it. He was a count, and he was in that kind of part of the world, southeastern Europe, but that's because that's where most of the most recent vampire beliefs were associated with places like what's now Romania and Hungary and places like that. So it had nothing to do specifically with Vlad the Impaler, is what she says. Maybe the biggest myth that is almost entirely Bram Stoker's invention is this dapper, suave, sophisticated, almost sexy vampire.
Almost?
Well, yeah. He had Boris Karloff. So Bela Lugosi played him as this suave European, sophisticated nobleman, and he's more or less portrayed that way in the novel. That, of course, as we've seen, that has absolutely nothing to do with olden days vampires. Again, these are corpses coming out of the ground. Again, sometimes they looked wrong. They were bloody, not bloody, but bloated, and they looked a little corpsey sometimes.
Yeah, but once they drank some human blood, Dean, they started to kind of rejuvenate.
Later on, Carrie, that's a modern monster myth. You just fell into a modern monster myth. That's why I'm having this entire episode, Carrie. Let's get it straight. Let's get the truth.
You're saving us from...
I am.
Okay.
Lies. But that really charismatic vampire, that actually goes back before Stoker. In 1819, John Polidori, who wrote a novel called The Vampire with a Y. By the way, that came out of the same germination of the whole Byron thing, that the trip of those people, I believe, in Switzerland, where Mary Shelley would write Frankenstein.
Right.
John Polidori, he was Byron's doctor, I believe. He was hanging out with them. Remember, they all said, let's write a story.
Yeah.
His story was called The Vampire.
Oh.
And it was one of the early vampire pieces of fiction. And he had his vampire be this kind of suave English, not English, but European nobleman.
Yeah.
But it was Bram Stoker in 1997 with Dracula, who, just made that like the norm. By the way, the first lesbian vampire was Le Fanu's, Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu's 1872 novel Carmilla, which I've read, which is really good. It's a female vampire. He also, by the way, like Stoker, was Irish. Some people read a lot into that. Like it had to be the Irish to invent vampires because they, blah, blah, whatever.
Yeah.
You're taking yourself too seriously. Stop it. Knock it off. Monsters and things like that should be an area of study, but a lot of that study is ridiculous. It makes it these broad societal, historical, sweeping generalizations that are, I think, they're just scary monsters are meant to scare you. Just calm down, everybody. So, but still, the idea that vampires were, revenants, the undead, and they were suicide victims. Sometimes they were associated with being witches, or they're caused by witches. All of these things are spirits, things like that. All those things are pretty much gone from the modern telling of vampires. And especially gone, though, is what I've been alluded to a couple of times now, is that they were visually thought to be like purplish and discolored even, because people did see decomposition and things like in those olden days, of course. This whole idea of the appearance of the vampire brings us to the last point I'll make about the vampire, which is why people thought vampires in the first place. And one of the things I think is because when they would, for whatever reason, exhume a body, they did sometimes appear like not decomposed, or they would have like blood, or their hair appeared to have grown, their fingernails appeared to have grown. So that became associated with the old original, quote unquote, true appearance of the vampire was something like that. They were discolored. They maybe had blood trickling out of their mouth or something like that. They were bloated. They had long fingernails. They may have a little bit longer hair. And some people, when it was associated with blood drinking, they maybe thought, okay, that's why they do, like you said, they rejuvenate themselves by drinking blood. That wasn't completely unheard of. It wasn't the norm in the old tales. Sometimes, their left eye stayed open even when they're dead, but their left eyelid would sort of pop open. I don't know where that came from. Very often, though, they would walk when the vampire would run around. They'd be in their linen, in their death linen. They were often depicted almost like we depict a modern Halloween ghost running around in their white linen and the shroud that they were buried in. That's often what they'd be wearing.
So people weren't buried in their
clothes?
Nicest
Not for the most
suit?
part. No, because someone else had to wear that nice suit that has stayed in the family. So that appearance of the vampire, that's been gone. What they wear has been gone. It really has been taken over by some version, in most depictions, of they can act. I mean, they can pass as a human, and these vampires of folklore were not really passed as human, or even try to, and they wouldn't do it or be able to do it even if they wanted to. So basically, that physical appearance and the sophistication of the vampire is one of the most lasting differences from the historical truth of vampires. Okay, Carrie, what monster would you like to talk about next?
Werewolves.
That's good, because that's what I'm going to talk about next. I have notes. Thank you. Whew, that worked out well. Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. We do have werewolf.
What if I had said the Kraken?
Oh, that'd be a problem. I have no notes on the Kraken. I think Krakens are pretty consistent through time.
Okay.
I think the way we depict Krakens these days, same as the olden days, except they may have been sometimes. Well, you know what? That's probably actually not true.
I was going to say, I don't think
Krakens
that's
were
true.
associated with whales, weren't they?
I don't know.
Days? Most people think of Krakens were giant squid. I think that's where the Kraken legend. I'm sure it did, but I think even whales were considered like scary big creatures before we started killing them for the oil. Mm-hmm. So there are werewolf type creatures going again way back, thousands of years. Ancient Greek has mythology about werewolves. King Lysaon of Arcadia, he was transformed into a wolf by Zeus because he had sacrificed a child on the altar of Zeus Lysias, and I don't know what that Zeus Lysias is. And he did something. He did something else. He did something like he tried to trick Zeus. Zeus is over for dinner. He tried to trick Zeus by having him eat like human flesh and see if he had noticed something like that. And Zeus was like, okay, you just made me eat a person. I'm not happy with that. You're a wolf. And he turned into a wolf.
Okay.
A werewolf, what we now call a werewolf. And all throughout, again, in Central Europe, And Eastern Europe, in Middle Ages, medieval times, there was a very widespread sense and this belief about werewolves, including on the British Isles, by the way. The mythology was it was particularly popular in Germany and the German-speaking areas of Central Europe. And it was early on in those days, in this original time, it was mostly associated with some kind of a witchcraft, some kind of sorcery or magic. In other places, in the Slavic areas to the east, it was more likely, the werewolf idea was more likely to be associated with like vampires or revenants in some sense. Like they were, again, remember Dracula and some vampires had control over wolves or communion with wolves.
Yeah.
So the Eastern European had this sense of werewolves and vampires. In Central Europe and Germany, they had this association with werewolves and witches. Interesting. I didn't know that. Being a werewolf, by the way, could be an accusation at witch trials. Like, oh, you're not just witchy and doing these witch things. You're a werewolf. You can turn into a wolf. Remember, it's a myth that all accused witches were women. A lot of them were men. So, it wasn't. They would accuse marginal women of being witches. We have witches. We'll get to witches in part 2.
Yeah.
But a lot of accused witches were men, and one of the things they sometimes accuse them of turning themselves into wolves. So, which is, by the way, we don't see any of that, do we? That's been completely lost. Any association, really, with any of those. We have no association with wolves and vampires, like we talked about before, and we really have no association with wolves as being creatures of magic or creatures associated with witches, of werewolves being associated with witches. I mean, can you think of any?
No.
In 1539, for instance, Martin Luther, the Protestant reformer, he called someone a beer wolf. The word beer wolf, by the way, word that has to be resurrected.
Absolutely.
How is Budweiser not on this yet? I don't understand. Maybe they are. I'm just thinking of the most overly marketed beer in the world.
A craft beer.
You're probably right. Probably right. But Martin Luther used the word beer wolf to describe a ruler who was tyrannical. So the idea was used for, non-wolf-like things.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to make that point because I love the word beer wolf.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. I really didn't need to point that out.
And at that craft brewery, they would have to have a Burgermeister.
That's true. And they could serve burgers and beer. So in fact, the whole belief in werewolves really did coincide quite a bit with belief in witchcraft. And the witchcraft, like 16th century, 17th century, you had all the witchcraft. And you had a lot. That's where most of the witch trials were. You also had this heightened belief in lycanthropy and people being able to turn themselves into wolves.
Yeah, that makes sense. Was it always associated with the full moon?
No, it was not. Not like it is now, where it's caused.
Right.
Or at least it manifests.
It's not caused by it, but that's when you're going to change. Yeah.
No, it wasn't. And there were trials for wolves. Like in 1603, a teenage werewolf was sentenced to life in prison in Bordeaux. It's like, nope, I'm sorry. Not like, burned at the stake and like that. You're going to go to jail like any other criminal. Your crime is turning yourself into a wolf.
Okay, but so then when he never turned into a wolf in jail, did they realize that maybe he's not? I'm glad that you made that point, because probably the biggest difference is how werewolves are made.
Yeah. Is what turns someone into a werewolf is not the same now as it was in the truth. It's a modern myth now. So how they became a werewolf and what it meant to be a werewolf are the two things we have different now than we had in the original tales. So what was a werewolf? What begat a werewolf was very different. The transformation, it didn't have to be permanent, for instance. It could be temporary.
Yeah.
You can do it for the night. Or you could do it for as long as something lasted, like you had a belt on or something like that. And when it was off, we're no longer a werewolf or a wolf. And by the way, I won't talk about the other ones, but every culture has to wear something.
Yeah.
In South America, they had to wear jaguars. They had to wear hyenas in Africa. They've had wear bears in Japan, I believe.
So that just means a person turns into that
animal. Yeah. And that's a key one. We'll get to that in a minute. But it was the animal, not a man-like version of that animal. That's a huge difference. Werewolves were wolves. When you turned yourself into a werewolf, you were a wolf. You weren't a man-wolf.
Well, Dean, if you're paying Michael J. Fox to play basketball
Yeah.
as a teen wolf,
Yeah.
you really want to get your money's worth. And
I don't think he cost that much. That
Have
was
Michael J. Fox be the.
I believe he made that just before he made Back to the Future, so his quote was not as big as you might think it is. So,
Yeah,
but
but
yes, you're
still.
right.
Have a Michael Landon. He
Michael
was, He was a
Landon.
teenage werewolf.
I think that was before he did Bonanza. Sorry, your examples are
They're paying a human actor for
Jack
that.
Nicholson. Jack Nicholson, who played the movie Wolf, big star, paid him a shit ton of money. You want to see a furry Jack Nicholson, not a wolf.
And he was a
True.
wolf.
Yes, he was. Well,
Yeah.
oh yeah, did he turn into a wolf? in
Yeah,
that?
I think
he did.
so.
Okay, so
It
they
was an
screwed it
actual
up.
wolf.
So these are all wrong. All these examples don't work.
No,
who's a famous?
because Jack Nicholson was too big. He said, "I'm not gonna
Fuck that
wear
shit.
fur and
CGI a wolf, bro."
Exactly.
How about Benicio del Toro in The Modern Wolfman? Did he turn into a? Yeah, he turned into a.
I didn't see that.
I'm almost positive he turned into a man-like wolf.
Yeah, because what's the common denominator with those?
What?
They have the capability of doing it,
Yeah, well,
of creating a CGI wolf or whatever. They didn't have.
no,
that.
he turned into a wolf man.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm
Oh,
almost
okay.
positive he did, and he
Well, there goes
he
my
didn't work
theory.
for cheap, for sure. So, the werewolf may also just be sort of the double of that person. In other words, it's like a projected something. That person that say your body's still there, but your werewolf double goes out and does depredations at the night or something like that. That was a common
Sure.
thing in the olden tales, or it may be like your soul, and that goes forth and eats people and things like that. But it was sort of your double or your soul or something like that. Was a common part of old folklore about werewolves, or maybe your body might still be there. You might be like in a trance, something like that.
Yeah.
If someone happened upon you in the forest or something like that. Even the idea of a what we now might call a familiar, like an animal familiar. Think about it, it's a little bit like that, except it ate people. That they were bad.
Yeah.
That's the difference. There were things like, even though it was your familiar or your double, where it got hurt, you would have that injury. That's a common old one. We still have that in the werewolf, mythos.
Yeah.
And that's been around for quite some time. Or if you killed out there, you were killed in real life too. But there's also werewolves who are identified by like physical traits. Like one of the most common in the olden days to identify a werewolf was that they had a unibrow. Their eyebrows met in the middle above the bridge of their nose.
Okay.
So yes, Frida Kahlo, NBA
Werewolf.
star Anthony Davis, YouTube star Electro Boom. I had to add that because these are all famous unibrow folks.
Well, also, everybody of certain nationalities.
No. That kid in season 11 of Kids Baking Championship with the
Stop.
unibrow. I can't remember his name. I hope to God he's not listening. He's a cute kid. But yes, a glorious unibrow. Because, Carrie, a lot of people would have unibrows, but they pluck them.
I know.
So these are people who famously keep their unibrows. They're telling us that they're werewolves.
Oh, sure.
That's all
Okay.
I'm saying. Anthony Davis is a very good basketball player. I believe he has wolf powers. Anthony, tell me I'm wrong. Curved fingernails. I guess you let your fingernails get long enough and they start to curve. That can be seen as a trait that you might be a werewolf. Low set ears
Okay.
and a quote unquote swinging stride. So if you had rhythm or something like that, you just you just chill
Yeah.
and you walk really chill, you might be a werewolf. Is all I'm saying.
I would think high set ears would be more. Of
You would think so,
of a
yeah, because
wolf.
wolves don't have.
No, yeah.
And of course, you could cut them, and if there's fur inside their skin, inside the wound, that was a werewolf.
Sure.
Almost like aliens, where you pull the skin from the eye or from the alien, and you
Yeah.
see the reptile actual skin under there. It's a little bit like that. Who had fur in a wound? Did that ever actually happen back in the day?
I mean, maybe by accident if
I
you
don't see how.
got injured near
I guess.
sheep shearing
But-
outfit. I don't know.
The biggest difference in the modern myth today is that most werewolves look like a wolf man, a man wolf. They look like a hybrid between a wolf and a human.
Yeah.
There's been some others. American Werewolf in London, he did even he had man-like traits, but for the most part,
No, I think he fully transformed into.
but he
a
was
wolf.
huge. He was abnormal. He was an abnormal wolf.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
In the old days, a wolf was a wolf. It was indistinguishable from any other wolf. In fact, you've heard of remember we did an episode on the Beast of Gévaudan
Yeah.
in France. There was it was thought to be possibly a big wolf or something, or a wolf or something like that, something a little bit abnormal. But no one at the time, and this was when there were still beliefs in werewolves around, no one ever said that's a werewolf. That was never thought of.
Yeah.
Because wolves were just regular wolves that looked like any other wolf. It's just a man did something to turn himself into a normal, regular wolf.
Right.
That is virtually gone. I don't think, if at best, if you become very wolf-like and not so man-wolf, you're like an American Woman from London. You're huge and particularly ferocious.
Yes, and more powerful than just a regular wolf. Yeah.
Most of the time, you have human-like traits. Most werewolves walk on two legs. No werewolf in the original stories walked on two legs.
Yeah.
Let alone had unwolf-like qualities. So that's probably the biggest modern monster myth with respect to werewolves, is the appearance of that werewolf.
Yeah.
And there's obvious reasons, like you said, in the first one, you could do stop action camera work and put more fur on the actor's face. I can't remember who played the Wolfman. Lon Chaney. Then it wasn't Lon Chaney?
I don't know.
In the original, the first Wolfman in 1932 or something like that. You do that, and it was amazing for the time. Now, of course, if you use CGI, or you can do actual practical effects like you did with American Woman from London and David Naughton, and turn him amazingly and look really good for the time. Now with CGI, even the American Woman from London doesn't look quite great enough.
Yeah.
But with CGI, you can turn them into whatever you want. But back then, you had to make them wolfman-like. So it makes sense that we have this modern myth about werewolves, but it's a major break from the truth about werewolves. I'm going to stick with that. After returning to the human form, werewolves in the olden days were like, they would be weak or debilitated, or sometimes they'd undergo periods of nervousness or depression, things like that. I think that's gone. Do you really see that anymore?
Not nervousness or depression, but they're naked and weak.
No, not really. I think they're naked and confused. But often, in some werewolf tales, it invigorates them. They have even when they're in their human form, they're stronger and ballsier and more brazen. I think it was in the olden days. It was the opposite. There was a cost to turning yourself through magic into a werewolf, and that was you'd come out of it, in bad shape. And that's the other one. That's the other big myth, the modern myth, is how to become a werewolf. There were various methods of doing this, but the biggest one, the most common one, was some kind of an item. Like in the Old Norse, if you put on a wolf skin, there are berserkers who would go nuts in battle. There was a type like that. I can't remember what they're called in Viking, where they'd put on wolf skin and go crazy and take these qualities of a powerful wolf. Remember, wolves were the scariest animal out there when they'd go into battle. And they would do that by putting in a wolf skin. It's not quite the same. They didn't really think they're magically werewolves, but they would take on these traits of this ferocious wolf. Some you would turn into a werewolf by rubbing some kind of a magic salve on you, some kind of a potion. And others, and probably the most common, was a belt. A magical belt, a witch or something like that, or a sorcerer made that belt for you. You'd put on that belt, you'd turn into a werewolf when you took off that belt. There's one story, I can't remember where it was from, where they didn't want to be a werewolf, but they put the belt on just to see if it really happened. And they, lived as a wolf for 10 years until the belt finally fell off, and bloop, they were a person again. And so they found that belt and burned it until it didn't happen again. So it was usually you became by some kind of magic, a salve, a belt, a skin, something like that. That's how you became a werewolf. Of course, how do you become a werewolf now?
You get bitten by a werewolf.
You get bitten by another werewolf, exactly. There's always this sort of sire werewolf that turned you or something like that. So the whole idea of the pelt or the thing, that's gone. So that's a huge, the way werewolves become werewolves is completely changed in the modern
Although
sense.
I feel like I've seen or heard the belt thing before.
Oh, I'm sure you have.
Yeah.
I may have talked about it because we did the Peter Stube episode quite a while ago, who was accused of being a werewolf, and that's how he was said to have become a werewolf.
Okay, maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah. Some times werewolves could be initiated, like in some Swedish folk tales. You make like a specially prepared beer, and when you drained it and said like a formula or some kind of a magical incantation, you became a werewolf. Some were easy, like you sleep outside on a summer night with a full moon shining directly on your face, in France and Germany, that was said to make you a werewolf.
Oh,
so
boy.
there was an association there with the
Yeah.
full moon. For the most part, there wasn't. You did when you wanted to do it.
Yeah.
You put on that pelt or that belt or that salve whenever you felt like.
Right.
Yes, you usually went out into the forest because you're going to hunt like a wolf. That's the whole idea. But you weren't. You could hunt and kill people like Peter Stoop supposedly did. But for the most part, you went and hunted and ravenously ate raw deer or something like that. And of course, there was a lot of it was demonic as well, like witches. Remember, werewolves and witches were associated quite a bit. So in the olden days, something like a satanic, demons or something like that, or even sometimes being possessed by a demon could turn you into a werewolf. That was another way to do it. The most typical ways was sorcery or something like that. So usually with some kind of physical things, a girdle, a pelt, some kind of something you wear. Girdles were not uncommon. It's a quote from an old writer from 1628. He says, "The werewolves are certain, Certayne, sorcerers who have anointed their bodies with an ointment which they make by the instinct of the devil, and putting on a certain enchanted girdle does not only unto the view of others seem as wolves, but to their own thinking have both the shape and nature of wolves, so long as they wear the said girdle. And they do so possess themselves as very wolves in worrying and killing, and most of humane creatures." End quote. That was probably, that little succinct quote, with most of the words spelled wrong, was how you typically became a werewolf back in the olden days.
Well, spelling was optional back in those days.
It was. A lot of Y's.
You just
a lot
spell,
of just extra
spell things
Y's.
however you wanted to.
Yeah, I know. Y's for eyes was really common.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So how do you cure? How do you not become a werewolf?
I mean, silver.
Okay, that's different, though. That's not curing. That's killing. It's weird because in the olden days, there were methods to stop someone. There were 3 methods in like middle Europe. There was, you can do it through medicine, like wolfsbane. You can do it surgically, some kind of operation, or you can be exercised and get that demon out, get that werewolf out. Those were considered ways to stop someone from becoming a werewolf. Obviously, just not wearing the belt and not putting the salve was another way as well. In the modern tales, that's kind of gone, though, isn't it? You don't have... The dominant myth today is that you're a werewolf for life.
Wait, isn't there a thing that if they kill the werewolf that made you?
Some do.
Okay.
Some have that, but that's not
I
always.
was thinking
Even
about
in
that
modern
with
movies.
The vampires too, but
yes.
I don't, yeah.
The myth today is that sometimes if you kill the werewolf who infected you, right?
Yeah.
But for the most part, there's no cure. Like the Howling, there was no cure. American Werewolf in London, he had no cure. I believe Teen Wolf. Teen Wolf. In the Teen Wolf, the series, I read this, not the movie, the series. There's a long-running, very successful series. They talked about that, like, if he could kill the werewolf that made him, that would make him not be a werewolf. Later on, as the series developed, they realized that was a mistake. There was no cure for him being a werewolf. In the original Wolfman, he was cured by a gypsy spell.
Yeah.
In Van Helsing, he was cured, or was trying to find a potion to cure him. So there's various ways. But for the most part, I would say very often in the modern telling, there is no way to not be a werewolf. And in the old days, there were ways to not be a werewolf anymore. In fact, for the most part, it was a choice. And of course, the silver thing. It does appear that there was kind of this a negative association with silver.
Yeah.
Silver was long seen as this sort of magical metal or even a holy metal. And so, yes, there were some association between silver bullets and silver and curing or stopping werewolves. Today, of course, the only way you kill werewolves is through a silver bullet. That was not a common thing, though. For the most part, you can kill werewolves any way you can kill anyone.
Oh,
so
okay.
the whole silver bullet thing is, for the most part, a modern addition as well. The last thing I'll add is that about werewolves is that their character, they were always awful. They killed people and kids sometimes, or they're associated with the devil or with witches, or at best case scenario, they're becoming wolves so they can go out and kill and eat deers and things like that. They were always bad. There was some sense evil. That, in the modern telling, has really eroded as well. You have a lot of heroic werewolves. You certainly do in Underworld. They're kind of, the Twilight series, the werewolves, I think, are good, aren't they? They're not bad.
Yeah, because they're Native Americans.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. There's other ones I've never heard of. Blood Lad, Dance and the Vampire, Boond, Rosaria, and Vampire. I've never heard of these things, but in those things, they have werewolves that are good, essentially. So another modern myth, the last one we'll talk about here for werewolves, is that werewolves have been kind of, there's the heroizing of werewolves, they're making them into good rather than evil.
Yeah, because if they're changing into wolves and not killing people, then they're not bad because they're just behaving as wolves behave, killing rabbits and deer and that regular wolves kill too.
I know, but there's the association with you were stepping beyond the bounds of what humans should do. You were trespassing into forbidden things like that. Yeah. And again, the association with you. The only way we were able to do that was by getting a witch to do it, or a demon, or Satan himself, or something like that.
Yeah.
So they were always bad in the olden days. Some people think there is one theory that werewolves were created to understand or to explain serial killers. Peter Stube, if Peter Stube really did do anything, he was in Bohemia in like the late 1500s. If he really did anything, he may have been a serial killer. He may have killed children.
Oh.
And so it's possible, probable he wasn't, but there could have been instances of serial killing from someone and they didn't know who the culprit was, and so they blamed it on werewolves. Yeah. Especially if the murders were violent. So I don't know if that's true or not, but there are theories about that, and there are modern scholars who believe that was going on. That was part of the answer or the reason we had werewolves.
Okay.
So that's the end of part 1. In part 2, we'll take it up with 4 more. We'll do Frankenstein's monster and ghost and witches and zombies.
Oh.
So until then, thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks. Come back next time.
Okay.